He gave up his first-class seat without a word, just nodded at the mother with two kids clinging to her legs, and walked to the back of the plane. What he didn't know was, she owned the entire airline, and what came after? Well, that part will stay with you long after the story ends. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay a while. Because sometimes, the quietest choices lead to the loudest love. Zach leaned back against the cold vinyl of the airport bench, his hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn canvas jacket that had seen more winters than he cared to count. Gate 14 was half lit and nearly empty, save for a few scattered travelers and the quiet hum of a vending machine that sounded like it, too, had grown tired of waiting. Outside the windows, a Maine snowstorm pushed across the tarmac, blotting out the lights with sheets of wind-driven white. The storm wasn't unusual for this time of year. Early February had never been kind. But tonight it felt heavier, like the sky was holding back something more than snow. Zach watched it fall, eyes tracing the streaks of frost building along the edge of the glass. He'd always liked storms, until the night it stole his wife. That had been 3 winters ago. A house fire, a phone call, a drive too late to matter. Since then, grief had taken the form of silence, of half-eaten meals, of conversations left unfinished with a teenage son who'd grown up too fast. Zach had sold their house 2 weeks ago. What remained now fit inside one backpack and a carefully folded first-class ticket to Charlotte. His final trip, he'd told himself. Not for a new beginning. Just to stop floating? The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing yet another delay for Flight 743. Zach sighed, adjusting his seat on the hard bench. He was about to close his eyes when he heard it. Soft at first, then louder. A child's sob. Then another. 2 small voices tangled in distress. He turned. A woman stood at the counter, her back to him. Her long brown coat was speckled with snow. Beside her were 2 identical girls, no older than 4, one tugging at her leg, the other clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit. Their cheeks were pink with cold, their eyes wide and damp. The woman's voice was calm but cracking. "I have a reservation. I booked these weeks ago," she told the agent. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the agent replied. "There was a system error. We're overbooked in coach. There's 1 seat left in first class, but it's significantly more." "I don't care how much it is," she whispered, her voice suddenly urgent. "I just need to get home." Zach watched her fingers shake as she opened her wallet. A credit card fell. One of the girls began to cry again. The woman knelt to comfort her, and for a moment her face turned toward Zach. She was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, but something in her eyes looked older, worn. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror too many times, tired of fighting, tired of pretending not to be scared. And then he stood up. He didn't think, didn't plan. Just walked over to the counter and cleared his throat. "I'd like to switch seats," he said. The agent blinked. "Sir? My seat is in first class." Zach handed over his boarding pass. "Give it to her. I'll take her seat in coach." The woman straightened. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice low. "I know," he replied, "but why would you?" "They need to get home." Zach's voice was even. "I've waited 3 years, I can wait a little longer." She looked at him like she wanted to say more, but all she managed was a nod. A thank you passed between them, in silence. The agent typed quickly, reissuing passes. Within minutes, the woman and her daughters were called to board early. As she passed Zach, she paused, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know your name," she said. Zach offered a tired smile. "Doesn't matter. You take care of those girls." She nodded. "I will." Then she was gone, and he was left, standing there with a wrinkled coach ticket and a strange tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. On the plane, Zach found himself at the back, in a narrow seat beside a quiet window. He didn't mind the downgrade. His knees were used to cramped spaces. His life lately had been nothing but cramped. Across the aisle, he could see them, the twins curled up in the wide seats of first class, wrapped in airline blankets, their Mother resting with her head against the window, eyes closed, jaw tense. Zach turned away, trying not to look. Half an hour into the flight, a flight attendant stopped by his row. "Mr. Taylor?" He looked up. "I was asked to give you this." She handed him a small napkin, neatly folded. He opened it. "I don't know who you are, but thank you for the seat and for seeing us when no one else did. I hope someday I can return the kindness." Zach held the note for a long time. It had been years since someone wrote him anything, and even longer since he felt like someone meant it. He tucked the napkin into his jacket pocket and leaned back in the seat, the hum of the engine dulling into the quiet rhythm of snow and night and breath. Outside the window, the clouds opened just enough to reveal a sliver of moonlight breaking through the storm. And for the first time in a long, long while, Zach Taylor let himself believe he might not be done yet. The hum of the airplane engine pulsed steadily through the fuselage, a lullaby for some, a memory for others. Zach sat by the window, knees pressed tight, arms crossed loosely over his chest. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft amber, and most of the passengers had drifted into the hush that only comes at 32,000 feet. He hadn't meant to glance across the aisle again, but something drew him. Maybe it was the quiet cough of one of the twins, or maybe it was the way the woman, Eliza, her name had been on the boarding pass, shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket tucked around the smaller girl's feet. Her face was half lit by the reading light overhead. She wasn't reading, just staring out, blinking slowly, like someone remembering something that didn't quite want to be remembered. Zach turned back to his own window. Nothing but clouds and black sky out there. Nothing but what he brought inside with him. He tried not to think about the house he'd sold, or the couch with the coffee stain, or the photos he'd boxed up and never opened again, but silence had a way of pulling everything back. The flight attendant passed by and Zach accepted a cup of water he didn't want. His hand trembled slightly as he took it. Old nerve damage or just the cold. Hard to say. A rustle across the aisle. "Eliza," one of the girls whispered. Not Mom, just her name. Zach blinked. He stole another glance. Eliza leaned down, whispering something too soft to hear. The girl whimpered once, then stilled, and then, unexpectedly, Eliza looked up right at him. Their eyes met. It wasn't long. A second, maybe two. But long enough for Zach to see the exhaustion behind her beauty, the weight behind her poise. There was something guarded in her gaze. Yes, but not cold. Just practiced. She looked away first. Zach sipped his water. A few minutes passed before she spoke. Quietly, across the aisle. "You didn't have to give up your seat, you know." He looked over, surprised. Her voice was low. "Careful." "But I did," he said simply. Eliza nodded once. It was kind. He shrugged. Didn't feel like much. It felt like everything to us. Silence again. Zach turned toward her a little. "Long day?" Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long year." He understood that. She glanced down at her daughters. "They're not usually this unsettled, but travel, it stirs things up." Zach nodded. "I get that." Another pause. "I'm Zach," he said finally. "Taylor, Eliza," she replied. Then, after a beat, "Just Eliza." He didn't press for more. Names were fragile things when people were trying to start over. "You heading home?" he asked. Something like that. He waited, sensing she was deciding how much to share. "My father passed," she said softly. "A week ago. I've been away for a while. I wasn't sure if I'd come back, but then..." She stopped herself. "My daughters needed to see where they come from, even if it's falling apart." Zach didn't know what to say, so he offered the only thing he could. "I'm sorry." Eliza nodded, eyes focused on the dark window. "Are you going home?" He exhaled. "Hard to say." Sold my house. Packed up what was left. Thought I'd drive south. Visit some places. Try to figure out where I belong. She looked at him again. Really looked. Did you lose someone? She asked gently. He paused, then nodded. My wife. Fire, 3 winters ago. A beat. I was supposed to be on shift that night, got called off last minute. Eliza's eyes softened. I'm sorry. Yeah, Zach said. Me too. They didn't speak for a while after that. But something had shifted. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. Just real. The kind that didn't need to be filled. Zach dozed off with his head against the cold window. When he woke, the captain was announcing the descent. Lights flickered back on. Passengers stirred. He gathered his backpack slowly. As the plane touched down in Charlotte, Eliza stood up, adjusting her girls' coats, checking for their stuffed animals. She glanced at Zach one last time. Thank you again, she said quietly. For more than the seat, Zach met her eyes. Safe travels, Eliza. Her smile this time was smaller, but it stayed. As he stepped off the plane, Zach felt the weight of his bag, the chill in his fingers, the ache in his chest. But beneath all that, something else. Like a door in his heart, one long locked, had you creaked open just enough to let in the faintest breeze. He didn't know her story. Not yet, but something told him. He hadn't seen the last of Eliza. The rain had followed Zach south, though it was warmer here in Charlotte, thick with early spring air and the scent of something just starting to bloom. He had planned to drive west that morning, toward Asheville, where a friend had offered him a spot above the garage for a few weeks. But something about the morning felt still, as if the road could wait. He was halfway through a black coffee and a dry biscuit from a gas station when his phone rang. Unknown number. Local. He almost didn't answer. Zach Taylor? A woman's voice asked. Yeah. This is Ruth Martin, assistant to Ms. Eliza Hayworth. She asked me to call. Zach blinked. I think you have the wrong. You gave up your seat for her and her daughters. She'd like to speak with you. A pause. Is this a joke? No, sir. Ms. Hayworth would like to thank you properly. If you're still in Charlotte, she's invited you to lunch. No press. No obligation. He hesitated. I'm not really a lunch type. She mentioned you might say that. Zach exhaled, rubbing his temple. What's the address? He drove with no real expectations. The address led to the edge of town where buildings grew older and trees stretched wide over cracked sidewalks. He pulled up in front of a large brick building that looked more like a library than anything else. But inside, marble floors, quiet receptionists, and a single elevator guarded by a paneled glass, while a man in a gray suit met him. Mr. Taylor, right this way. The elevator rose slow and silent. At the top floor, doors opened to a penthouse office that could have belonged to a politician or a queen. And there she was. Eliza stood behind a desk of polished walnut, her hair pulled back, a navy blazer tailored perfectly to her frame. She wasn't holding a child now. She wasn't chasing after toys. She wasn't tired. She was regal. And for the first time, Zach realized he hadn't just helped a mother on a rough night. He had helped the woman who owned the entire airline. Eliza, he said quietly. Her smile was restrained. Zach, thank you for coming. This is a long way from gate 14. Yes, she said simply. It is. She gestured to a pair of chairs by the window. Would you sit? Zach remained standing. So what is this, a press stunt, a favor to ease your guilt? She tilted her head. It's not guilt, it's gratitude. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, she said. He crossed his arms. Then why am I here? Eliza looked at him, and for a moment the gloss of her power cracked. Because something about you felt real, she said. And I haven't felt real in a very long time. Zach blinked. I've been running this company since my father's illness, she continued. I've done everything expected of me. Built boardrooms, survived scandals, grown quarterly profits, but somewhere in the middle of that I forgot how to see people. She paused, until a stranger gave up a seat without needing anything in return. Zach shifted. He wasn't used to being the center of a story. "I'm not special," he said. "No," Eliza agreed. "You're kind. That's rarer." A silence settled between them. Zach looked toward the window. "Why now?" She hesitated. "Because I'm tired. Because I'm scared. Because I'm taking my daughters back to the house I grew up in, the only place that still feels like it might belong to me. It's old, and it's falling apart, but I'd like to see it come alive again." She met his gaze, "And I can't do it alone." Zach stared at her, stunned. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking," she said slowly, "if you'll come stay there. Not as a guest, not as a helper, just as someone who doesn't walk away." He felt the floor tilt beneath him, not literally, but in that quiet, unsettling way grief sometimes did, like the world had turned and no one had told him. "I'm not looking for a job," he said. "I'm not offering one. I'm not a project. I'm not trying to fix you." Zach studied her. Her face wasn't pleading. It wasn't polished either. It was honest. "Come see the house," she said, softer now. "That's all." Zach looked down at his hands, at the burn scars, the calluses, the quiet ache that never quite left his chest. And then he looked back at her. "I'll follow you," he said. "In my truck." 2 hours later, he drove behind her SUV down a narrow country road, past fields, turning gold under the late winter sun. They stopped at the edge of a gravel drive lined with bare apple trees. At the end stood a white farmhouse with peeling paint, cracked shutters, and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. It looked forgotten, but not unloved. Eliza stepped. Out of her car, her daughters asleep in their car seats. She turned to him, hair blowing in the wind. "Welcome," she said softly, "to where everything ended, and maybe where something can begin again." The house creaked like it remembered every voice that had once passed through it. Zach followed Eliza up the porch steps, careful where he placed his boots. One loose board nearly gave beneath his heel. The door stuck slightly, and she gave it, a gentle shove with her shoulder. Inside, the scent of time rushed to greet him. Dust. Old wood. A faint trace of citrus cleaner long evaporated. The kind of smell that carried both memory and absence. The living room was wide, with sagging bookshelves and wallpaper that curled like the edge of forgotten letters. Sunlight drifted in through sheer curtains, softening the age of everything. "It hasn't been touched in over a year," Eliza said. Not since the funeral." Zach nodded but didn't speak. His eyes scanned the room. There were no photographs, no signs of children's laughter or recent meals. Just silence. Eliza moved toward the fireplace where a crooked clock stood, frozen at 4:12. "My father loved this house," she said quietly, "but he loved the company more." Zach stepped into the kitchen, trailing her voice like a thread. "You grew up here?" She nodded. "Until I was 17. Then boarding school, business school, boardrooms." She opened a drawer, found a box of matches, and lit the small pilot under the stove. A soft click, a brief whoosh, and the room warmed by a breath. "I always thought I'd come back here someday," she added, pouring water into a kettle. "Just not like this." Zach watched the steam rise, curling toward the ceiling like something hesitant to leave. Outside, a soft breeze rattled the porch swing. She handed him a chipped mug. "No cream. No sugar." "Black's fine," he said. They stood in the silence of the kitchen for a long moment before she said, "There's something I want to show you." Out back, the late afternoon light stretched long over the brittle grass. The twins were still napping upstairs, the baby monitor crackling gently in Eliza's coat pocket as she led Zach through the yard. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling, through bare branches. And then he saw it. A single apple tree stood at the far edge of the property. Its limbs were gray and twisted, bark cracked with time, It was completely bare, no buds, no blossoms, not even a leaf. Zach tilted his head. It's dead. Eliza folded her arms. It never bloomed. He looked at her. My father planted it the year I was born, she said. He said it would be mine, that when it blossomed I'd know I was ready to take root. Zach turned back to the tree. He watered it, pruned it, talked to it. Every spring he swore this would be the year. And every spring, nothing. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He blamed the soil, the weather, said maybe it was just waiting for me to come home. Zach stepped closer, ran his hand gently over the trunk. The wood was dry, but not crumbling. It's not gone, he murmured. She raised an eyebrow. This tree, he said, it's not dead. It's resting. She let out a soft, skeptical laugh. That sounds like something someone says when they don't want to cut it down. He looked at her, voice steady. No. That's something someone says when they know things can grow again, given time. They stood there, the wind curling around them like an old story. Eliza pulled her coat tighter. I never felt like I belonged here, she admitted. Even as a kid, the house was too big. My mother too distant, my father, well, he loved things that flew. Planes, power, expansion, not people. Zach stayed silent. Sometimes the most honest things needed a quiet place to land. I came back, she said. Not to honor him, but because this was the only place I remembered feeling safe. Even if that safety was just a corner bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a tree that never gave fruit. Zach looked at the house behind them. It could be more than memory. She met his eyes. He added, but it needs care, time, and someone who doesn't leave when it gets hard. She nodded slowly. I don't know how to ask for help. You just did. Later that evening, Zach found an old broom and started sweeping the porch. Eliza carried down a pile of faded linens and ran them through a washer in the mudroom. The house groaned and shifted around them, unused to footsteps, to breath, to new weight. The girls awoke hungry and disoriented. Eliza fed them soup from a can. Zach cut up slices of apple from a bruised bag he'd brought in his truck. They sat on the floor by the fireplace, blankets wrapped around small shoulders. At one point, one of the girls pointed at the burn mark on Zach's hand. What's that? She asked. Zach hesitated, then smiled gently. It's a reminder. Of what? He paused. That sometimes we survive more than we expect. The girl seemed satisfied with that and leaned into her sister. Eliza watched him across the room, something quiet flickering behind her eyes. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But it was something warmer than gratitude, and something stronger than coincidence. That night, as the wind whispered outside and the old house settled into the rhythm of being lived in again, Zach lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere, upstairs, Eliza was reading bedtime stories. Outside, the apple tree stood in the dark, barren, silent, waiting, but no longer alone. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No storm, no crisis. Just the smell of old coffee from the half-working pot and the creak of floorboards that had forgotten the weight of daily footsteps. Zach woke early, like always, out of habit more than need. The couch had been stiff but better than the truck, seat he'd grown too used to. He stretched, rubbed the back of his neck, and shuffled toward the kitchen. Eliza was already there, barefoot, sleeves rolled. The kettle whistled faintly behind her. Morning, she said without turning. Zach nodded. You always up this early? Only when something feels like it might be worth waking up for. She turned then, and he saw that she wasn't wearing armor today. No blazer, no gloss, just a threadbare sweatshirt and hair pulled back in a loose knot. It suited her. I found instant oatmeal, she said, lifting a spoon. Not exactly gourmet, but it works. I'll take anything that doesn't come from a vending machine. They ate at the kitchen table, which wobbled slightly to the left. Zach took note of it. Add that to the list. Porch step, loose railing, Door that sticks, table leg. The kind of problems you only fix when you mean to stay. The second morning, Zach was on the porch before sunrise, a mug of coffee in hand and a toolbox beside him. The porch step came up easy, rotted clean through in the middle. He worked in silence, letting the scrape of the hammer and the soft chirp of waking birds fill the space. Eliza appeared in the doorway holding a cup of tea. "You don't sit still much, do you?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Not really, wired for it." She sat on the steps, careful to avoid the one he hadn't replaced yet. "My dad used to fix things," she said, "but only the things people could see, the windows, the shutters, never the quiet stuff, the hinges, the locks." Zach nodded. "The stuff that really matters." She looked at him. "Yeah." They sat in the hush of that morning. Two people who had run out of words long ago, but were slowly learning them again. By the third morning, the house had started to smell like life. The twins chased each other barefoot down the hallway, giggling, dragging mismatched blankets behind them like flags. Zach built a temporary gate to keep them from tumbling down the back steps. Eliza labeled the cabinets with sticky notes and found a stack of her mother's old recipes buried in a tin marked, "Do not touch." Zach smiled when he saw the label. Eliza caught him. She wasn't exactly subtle. That afternoon, the two of them stood in the kitchen, elbow deep in flour, attempting something called maple crumb pie that neither had ever made but both pretended to know. "Did you cook with your wife?" Eliza asked casually. Zach nodded, sifting sugar. "She made messes, I cleaned them." Eliza smiled. "Sounds familiar." He paused. "What about you? Did you cook with?" She shook her head. "No with. Just me. And microwave dinners. And a lot of silence." Zach met her eyes. "That's starting to change." "Is it?" He nodded. "This? Right now? It's not nothing." That evening, the four of them ate the pie. Slightly overbaked, unevenly sliced, but warm. The girls declared it the best dessert they'd ever had, which made Eliza laugh for the first time Zach had ever heard. It was light and sudden, like wind through an open window. He didn't realize how much he'd wanted to hear it. Later, while Eliza read bedtime stories and the girls fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, Zach sat by the fireplace with his hands wrapped around a mug. The house still groaned, the windows still fogged. But something had shifted. The silence no longer felt abandoned. It felt lived in. And maybe, just maybe, so did he. At the edge of the property, the apple tree stood in its usual stillness, gray and unspeaking. But Zach had noticed something that morning, barely a whisper of green at the root line. Not a bloom, not yet, but a promise. He leaned against the porch railing that night, staring toward the tree in the starlight. Eliza stepped beside him, silent, shoulders touching. "You think it'll grow?" she asked. Zach didn't look away from the tree. "I think maybe it just needed someone to stay long enough to see it try." She was quiet a long time before she said, "I'm glad you're here, Zach." He turned to her. "So am I." And for the first time in years, he meant it. It started with a knock at the door. Zach had just pulled a tray of blueberry muffins from the oven. His first attempt at baking, lopsided but proud, when Eliza opened the front door and froze. A man in a suit stood there, clean-shaven, confident, too polished for this road. "Eliza Hayworth?" he asked, as if he didn't already know. Zach stepped into the hallway, wiping flour from his hands. He caught the way Eliza's posture shifted, not out of fear but defense, like someone preparing for a blow. "Yes," she said. "You need to leave." "I'm here on behalf of Sterling Aviation's board," the man replied, voice syrupy. "You've missed 4 scheduled calls. The press is circling. Investors are calling. You've been seen." Zach tensed. "Seen," Eliza echoed. "Calm on the surface, ice underneath." The man held up a phone. On the screen was a grainy photo. Eliza stepping out of the local bakery with her daughters, Zach just behind her. The caption read, "Eliza Hayworth, the billion-dollar heiress hiding out with mystery man and twins in Carolina. Zach felt the bottom drop out. The suit continued. This story's spreading fast. The media is speculating everything from scandal to secret love affairs. You need to get ahead of it. The board's demanding a public statement. I don't owe them my life, she said, steady now. No, the man agreed. Just your legacy. And then he left, as swiftly as he'd come. Eliza didn't speak. For the rest of the day, she moved like someone underwater, present but unreachable. The girls felt it. They played softer, stayed closer. Even the house seemed to sense it, the wind clattering the windows as if warning something was shifting. Zach watched her from the porch, unsure of the right distance. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep and the fireplace cracked gently in the hearth, he found her in the kitchen staring at the headline on her phone. I should have known this wouldn't last, she said quietly. Zach stayed in the doorway. It's just noise. No, she said. It's who I am, or at least who they say I am. He walked in, sat across from her. Who do you say you are? Eliza looked at him. Right now, a woman who lied to herself. I thought I could disappear, be someone else, build a world out of pie crusts and porches. Her voice cracked, barely. But the world doesn't let people like me go quietly. Zach let the silence settle, then softly. You didn't lie, you just tried to be human. She met his eyes. And what about you, Zach? You think this doesn't touch you? You're in those pictures. You're in it now. He nodded. Yeah. And you're not mad? I've been mad before, he said. Didn't fix anything. She laughed, a tired, broken sound. I can't protect you, she said. I'm not asking you to. You should. Zach leaned forward. Eliza, I didn't come here for protection. I came because I saw someone on the edge trying to hold it together for two little girls, and I knew that look because I've worn it for years. She blinked. I'm not here for the headline, he added. I'm here for the quiet parts. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she stood. I need air. She disappeared into the yard, walking barefoot through the cold grass. Zach followed at a distance, letting the night swallow most of the space between them. She stopped at the apple tree. It hadn't changed much. Still barren. Still waiting. Eliza leaned against the trunk, arms folded. I used to think I'd grow into the kind of person people admired, she said softly. I spent years trying, polishing, presenting, performing. She looked back at him. And it worked. Until I had kids. And I realized I didn't want to be someone admired. I wanted to be someone known. Zach stepped closer. I've been hiding too, he said. Her eyes didn't leave his. I used to think if I kept moving, grief couldn't catch me, he continued. But turns out it's not a thing you outrun. It rides with you. Until you stop long enough to feel it. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches, and now she asked, I've stopped. She looked at him, tired and raw. You think any of this is real? Zach looked toward the house, glowing soft with firelight, the windows fogged, a child's drawing taped to the fridge. It feels like it. Eliza stepped away from the tree. But how long can it last? He met her where she stood. That depends. On what? On whether we let the world decide for us. Back inside, the house was quiet again. The girls were still asleep. The fireplace still burned low. Zach poured 2 mugs of tea. Eliza took hers, her fingers brushing his, warm against the chill of doubt. They didn't speak more that night. But when she reached out and gently touched his wrist, the scarred one, Zach didn't flinch. And when he turned out the light, something inside him stayed on. The wind changed just after midnight. It whistled sharp through the eaves, carrying the scent of snow and something colder. Worry, perhaps. Zach felt it first, half asleep on the couch, the hairs on his arms rising like the storm itself had crept through the cracks in the walls. He sat up slowly, listening. There. Footsteps above. Then a soft cry. Then another. He moved fast, his instincts, sharper than his body, climbing the stairs 2 at a time until he reached the girl's room. Eliza was already there, crouched by the bed, one hand on each daughter. "They're burning up," she said, her voice too calm to be calm. Zach knelt beside her. The girls tossed under their blankets, cheeks flushed, skin clammy. "How long?" he asked. I don't know. They were fine earlier. It must have come on suddenly. They've been coughing." He touched one forehead, then the other. "High. Too high. We need a doctor," he said. "There's no hospital out here. The clinic's in town, but it's closed after 9. We'll go anyway," he said. "Emergency lights'll be on." Eliza hesitated. "The roads are iced." Zach met her eyes. "Then we'll walk." "You're not serious." "I've carried people out of fires hotter than this," he said, already reaching for his coat. "I'm not losing anyone tonight." Eliza stood frozen as he scooped the heavier of the girls into his arms, wrapping her in a blanket. "Bundle the other," he told her gently. "We'll take turns carrying." She nodded, trembling but moving. Minutes later, they stepped into the night. The cold slapped them hard, the kind that finds your bones. Snow had begun to fall again, light but steady, turning the world into a blur of white and breath. The road stretched ahead, dark and narrow. Trees swayed on both sides, groaning against the wind. The town was a mile and a half, far but not impossible. They walked in silence at first, each holding a child, taking careful steps, breath clouding in the air. Zach led, knowing the path by memory now. After 20 minutes, Eliza stumbled. Zach turned back, instinct kicking in. "Give her to me." "I can carry her," she insisted. "I know," he said, "but I need you strong, just for a little longer." She handed over her daughter, wordless. Zach now held both girls, one tucked against each side of his chest. His legs ached. His breath grew shallow. But he kept moving. Eliza walked beside him, silent except for the way she reached out, once, twice, to steady him when his steps faltered. Finally, the lights appeared, dim at first, then clearer. A red cross above the door. The town clinic. Zach kicked the door twice, hard. A few seconds later, an older woman in scrubs opened it, startled. "We're closed. They have fevers," Zach said. "Both of them. High ones." The nurse stepped back instantly. "Get them inside." The girls were checked. Fever reducers given. Cool compresses applied. One had a mild respiratory infection, the other a developing earache, painful, but treatable. The nurse assured them both would be okay. Zach finally sat down in the corner, back against the wall, arms limp. Eliza sat beside him. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I did." She turned to him. "Why?" He looked at her, eyes dark but soft. "Because if I lose again..." He swallowed. "If I have to feel that pain one more time, I still choose it. I choose them. I choose you." She stared at him, stunned. "I don't know what this is," he said. "What we're building, if it'll last, if the world'll let it. But tonight, I chose to fight for it." Eliza blinked fast. "And if I break it, I'll stay long enough to help you rebuild." She closed her eyes. "I've never had anyone say that to me before." He leaned his head back against the wall. "Then maybe it's time someone did." They returned to the house just before dawn, the sky lightening at the edges. Zach carried the sleeping girls back to bed. Eliza followed behind, her hand brushing against his back for balance, but also something more. Thanks. Trust. The beginning of whatever came next. Later she found him on the porch, a blanket draped over his shoulders, watching the apple tree sway in the breeze. "It's still standing," she said. "So are we." She sat beside him, and for a long while they just sat, bare feet on cold wood, hearts warm from something neither of them had planned, but both were now part of. The storm had passed, but what it left behind was no ruin. It was a vow, unspoken, but rooted. The fire started in the crawlspace. Zach would later trace it back to the old fuse box behind the laundry wall, a single frayed wire, left too long without care, finally giving in after years of quiet warning. But in the moment, it wasn't sparks or smoke that woke him, it was instinct. He was already moving before he fully opened his eyes, feet on the floor, breath tight in his chest. Something was wrong. The air had shifted. The house felt wrong. Down the hall, Eliza appeared, half-dressed, eyes wide. "Do you smell smoke?" Zach said, already sprinting down the stairs. By the time he reached the kitchen, the haze was visible, pale gray ribbons curling from the floorboards, rising in tendrils through the vents. "Eliza!" he shouted, voice sharper than he meant. "Get the girls out, now!" She didn't argue. Zach grabbed the extinguisher by the back door and dropped to his knees. The smoke was thicker now, crawling up the walls, licking the edge of the ceiling. He aimed at the base of the crawlspace panel and pulled the trigger. It hissed. For a moment he thought maybe. Then came the sound he dreaded, the low, gut-deep crack of wood giving way to flame. Zach stood, coughing. The fire wasn't waiting for permission. Neither could he. By the time the volunteer fire crew arrived from town, the back half of the house was already gone. Flames had torn through the laundry room, across the kitchen, and up into the rafters like they'd been waiting all along. Zach stood in the front yard, barefoot, soot-streaked, arms wrapped around both girls. Eliza was beside him, motionless. The wind carried the heat away now, but not fast enough. The house groaned once more, louder this time, as if sighing its final breath. Then the roof collapsed. The world dimmed for a while after that. Neighbors came. Someone brought blankets. The sheriff offered coffee. A woman from down the road gave the girls her own coat. Someone said the word insurance, but it felt like a cruel joke. Zach didn't speak. Not until Eliza turned to him. Eyes rimmed red. Voice hoarse. "I should have fixed it sooner. I should have had it checked." "Stop," he said, firm, but gentle. "This isn't your fault." She shook her head. "It was our home." Zach exhaled. "It was our start." They stood in silence, watching the last embers sputter beneath the foam. Then Eliza whispered, "I don't have anything left now." Zach looked at her. "You have 2 girls asleep in your arms." She blinked. "You have a town full of strangers who came running." He paused. "And you have me." Eliza stared at him like she didn't know whether to cry or run. "I don't know how to rebuild," she said. "You don't have to. Not alone." The next morning, Zach returned to the ruins. He walked the blackened remains slowly, boots crunching over wet ash and splintered wood. The sun was rising behind him, casting light over what was left. Half a chimney, a cracked mirror, a melted drawer handle. He reached the far end of the yard where the apple tree stood. It was scorched, bark blackened. But somehow, impossibly, it had survived. The fire had come close. Very close. But the tree still stood. He reached out, resting a hand on the trunk. Beneath the soot, it was solid. Still warm. Still alive. He didn't know why that mattered so much, but it did. Maybe because it was the only thing that hadn't run. That afternoon, Eliza joined him. She wore the same clothes from the night before, hair tied back, face drawn, but her voice was steady. "I couldn't stay in town," she said. "Everywhere I went, people looked at me like I was a headline." Zach didn't look away from the tree. "You're not a headline. I don't feel like anything. You will." She stepped closer, eyes on the charred bark. "It survived," she said softly. "So did we." They stood there side by side as the wind moved gently through the trees that remained. After a while, Eliza whispered, "What now?" Zach turned to her, voice quiet but certain. "Now," he said, "we plant something new." It began with a knock, not urgent, not formal. Just a knock, like someone saying, "I'm here, I see you." Zach opened the borrowed door of the small rental on the edge of town. Sheriff Hollis stood on the porch holding a box of tools and a roll of old blueprints. Thought you might need a hand, the sheriff said. Behind him, a pickup truck idled with two younger men in the back, unloading wood. One of them, Cal, the local carpenter, tipped his hat. "We heard about the fire," he said simply. "Not much left, huh?" Zach stepped aside. "Come in." They didn't go inside. They walked past him, heading straight to the lot, to the ashes, to where the house had stood. Like they already knew, this wasn't about comfort. It was about starting again. By midday, more trucks rolled in. Benny from the hardware store brought nails and tarps. Carla from the bakery brought sandwiches and a thermos of soup. A teenage boy from the high school showed up with a shovel. He didn't speak, just got to work, clearing debris. Eliza watched it unfold from the porch of the rental, arms wrapped around herself as if she didn't know whether to run or weep. Zach stood beside her, quiet. "They don't even know me," she whispered. "They know enough," he said. "I didn't ask for this." "You didn't have to." She turned toward him. "Why are they doing this?" Zach looked toward the tree line where kids were playing tag near the edge of the field. "Because that house didn't just belong to you," he said. "It belonged to what it meant. They worked every day." Zach hammered alongside Cal, learning the rhythm of nails and timber. Sheriff Hollis handled the permits. Teenagers ran electric cables under supervision. Someone showed up each day with coffee or bread or blankets. No one asked questions. No one kept count. Eliza helped where she could, measuring windows, choosing colors, painting trim. Her hands trembled the first time she held a brush. "I haven't done anything like this since I was 10, she said. "You're doing just fine," Zach told her. One afternoon, she found a faded crate of old dishes in the back of Benny's truck. She opened it and gasped softly. "These were my mother's." He looked at her. "They donated them after she passed," Eliza said, eyes wide. "I didn't even know where they'd gone." She pulled out a blue porcelain teacup. Uncracked, it felt like a message. At the far edge of the lot, the apple tree still stood, blackened but resilient. Zach spent his evenings pruning it carefully, trimming what had died but leaving the roots. He refused to dig it up. One morning, while Eliza watched from the porch, he knelt in the dirt with a spade, clearing space around the base. "What are you doing?" she called, giving it room to breathe. She came down holding a mug of tea, handed it to him, and when he looked up, she was smiling, tired, but real. A few days later, Zach planted a second tree beside the old one, smaller, barely past sapling. "Why two?" Eliza asked. He wiped sweat from his brow. "The first one's memory," he said. "The second's promise." She stared at him, something catching in her throat. "No one's ever done that for me," she whispered. Zach looked up. "Done what?" "Stayed." The house rose slowly. Walls first, then the porch. The windows came next, followed by the heart of it all, the kitchen. Eliza chose yellow curtains. Zach built the table by hand using wood from the charred remains of the old one. He sanded every edge until it was smooth enough for small hands. The girls painted the legs with bright colors, one red, one blue, one green, one gold. "Doesn't match," Eliza said, laughing. Zach shrugged. "Neither do we." The night before, they moved in. The town gathered in the front yard. No fanfare, no speeches, just potluck dishes and fireflies. Someone brought a guitar. The girls danced barefoot. Carla lit paper lanterns that floated like prayers above the tree line. Eliza stood beside Zach under the stars. "Do you think it's strange?" she asked. "That this feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived?" "No," he said. "Why?" "Because home isn't made of walls," Zach said. "It's made of hands and hearts and people who show up." She looked toward the apple trees. The older one, scarred and weary, stood quietly in the moonlight. The younger, thin and trembling, reached up beside it. Eliza whispered, "What if it doesn't bloom?" Zach turned to her. "Then we wait," he said. "And water. And hope." She didn't answer, just leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time, she didn't feel like someone running. She felt like someone rooted. Spring arrived, like an apology. The last frost melted quietly into the soil, leaving behind soft green grass and air that carried the smell of newness. Birds returned to the fields. Bees danced in the garden boxes Zach had built behind the kitchen. The house stood tall now, not perfect, but real. The porch no longer creaked, the windows no longer fogged from within. There were smudges on the fridge, muddy boots by the door, and a trail of drawings down the hallway, signs of a home lived in, not curated. Zach sat on the porch swing, a mug of coffee in hand, watching as Eliza chased the twins barefoot through the yard. They were shrieking with laughter, hair wild in the wind, arms full of dandelions and half-finished crowns. His chest ached, not from loss this time, but from the weight of everything he almost missed. Later that morning, they walked to the back of the yard toward the 2 apple trees. The older one still bore scars, blackened bark, a missing limb. But it stood, and for the first time in over a decade it bloomed. One delicate blossom near the crown, pale pink against the gray wood. Eliza touched it like a secret. "I thought it was done," she whispered. Zach stood beside her. "It just needed someone to wait for it." She turned to him. "Like me?" He met her eyes. "Like all of us." She reached for his hand, and when her fingers found his, rough skin against rough skin, he didn't flinch. He held on. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, Eliza lit candles on the windowsill, the flickering light throwing soft gold across the kitchen floor. Zach sat at the table he'd built. She poured 2 glasses of cider, placed one in front of him, then sat across from him, fingers curled around her cup. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "About that day at the airport." He smiled. "Feels like years ago." "I keep wondering why you did it," she said. "Why you gave up your seat." He shrugged. "Because they needed it more." She tilted her head. "But why really?" Zach looked down at his hands, then up at her. "Because I didn't think I had anything left to give," he said. "And when I handed over that seat, I realized I still had a choice." She was quiet for a moment. "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, voice low, "I choose this, every day. Not because it's easy, but because it's real." She reached across the table, took his hand. "I don't promise forever," she said. "I can't." He nodded. "Me neither. But I choose today," she added. "And I want to choose tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that, as long as you're willing." His voice was almost a whisper. "I am." The next morning, they planted a 3rd apple tree, just behind the other 2. The girls helped dig the hole, their tiny hands dirt-covered and delighted. Zach let them name the tree. They called it Promise. When the last scoop of earth had been packed down, Eliza leaned on Zach's shoulder. "I think this is the beginning," she said. He nodded, eyes soft. "No more running? No more hiding. Just showing up," he said. "Just choosing," she whispered. Years later, when people asked how they met, they never gave the full story. They never mentioned the headline or the scandal or the fire. They just said, he gave up his seat, and she gave him a home. And somewhere in the yard behind that little house at the edge of town, 3 apple trees stood in a crooked line. One bore the scars of the past, one stretched upward like a quiet prayer, and one, young and still learning, blossomed early that spring with flowers soft as forgiveness, the seed he gave away. If this story touched your heart, stay with us, because here every day is a step toward healing,